To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sagata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three, ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms' atoms, in all aspects with supreme faith, I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a vigil aberration, flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foul faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by waves of aging, sickness, and death. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in concentration on the categories of phenomenon called profound perception. Also at that time, the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, now the prayers of God, Sattva, spoke to the Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, any son or daughter of good family who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it thus. He or she beholds but five aggregates, and that they are in their own being, they are empty. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness does not differ from form, and form does not differ from emptiness. Likewise, feelings, recognitions, compositional factors, and consciousnesses are empty. So, Shariputra, all dharmas are empty, lacking differentiating marks. They are not produced nor stopped, not defiled, and not immaculate, not deficient, and not complete. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visible form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tangible, no mental object, no Aya element, and so on, up to no mind element and no mental consciousness element, no ignorance and no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Likewise, there is no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no wisdom, knowledge, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas abide relying on the perfection of wisdom, without obscurations of thought, and so are unafraid. Transcending perverted views, they attain the end, nirvana. All Buddhas existing in three times rely on the perfection of wisdom, fully awakened to the highest perfect enlightenment. Therefore, one should know that the mantra of the perfection of wisdom is a mantra of great knowledge, the highest mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that allays all suffering. The truth, since it is nothing, has nothing wrong. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata om gate gate paragate parasam gate bodhisoha. In this way, Shariputra should a bodhisattva Mahasattva train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Lord arose from the concentration and commended the noble Lord Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, well said, O son of the good family. So it is, O son of good family, so it is. Just as you have taught, should the profound perfection of wisdom be practiced, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Lord had uttered this, the Venerable Shariputra, the noble Lord Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, and the whole world, all those present, including Devas, human beings, Asuras, and Gandharvas, were delighted and applauded the Lord's speech. This completes the Sutra of the Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom.
Short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon, I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayam. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang
Soke Chognam La Jangchu
Janchu Badu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi Chi Jen Yi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Papen Chiek Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chodang
Soke Chognam La
Janchu Badu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi Chen Yi Pe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho
Sangye Chodang
Soki
Jangchu Badu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi
Janchu Badu Dagni Kapsuchi
Drola Panche Sangye Drupa. Thank you very much. we have obstacles today, so we'll have to.
Yes.
So I'm going to begin the session. We'll do a short Tonlen meditation, but I just wanted to create a motivation for it. And quoting first from Shantideva, all misery in the world derives from desiring happiness for oneself. All happiness of the world arises from desiring the happiness of others. And His Holiness glosses, from time immemorial, the childish have been concerned with their own welfare. What has been the result? What have we gained by this? On the other hand, the Buddhas, with the help of spiritual guidance, have totally sacrificed themselves for the welfare of others, whom they cherish and hold most dear. They have generated such an attitude and then embarked on the practices and activities that accord with such a wholesome mind. As a result, they have gained total realization and have thus become the refuge and guide of all beings. Therefore, by realizing the difference between the childish, the spiritually immature, and the enlightened, we must relinquish the self-cherishing attitude and accept the precious thought of cherishing others. Moreover, as Shantideva explains, quote, if I cannot completely exchange my happiness with the sufferings of others, how will it be possible to attain full awakening? Even in cyclic existence, I'll find no peace. So that is our motivation. We'll recite the Tonlen verse and accompany that with the visualization. I'll recite it 3 times in English today. And thus, O venerable compassionate gurus, we seek your blessings that all karmic debts, obstacles and sufferings of mother beings may without exception ripen upon us right now, and that we may give our happiness and virtues to others and thereby invest all beings in bliss. And thus, O venerable compassionate gurus, we seek your blessings that all karmic debts, obstacles and sufferings of all mother beings may without exception ripen upon us right now, and that we may give our happiness and virtues to others and thereby invest all beings in bliss. And thus, O venerable compassionate gurus, we seek your blessings that all karmic debts, obstacles and sufferings of all mother beings may, without exception, ripen upon us right now, and that we may give our happiness and virtues to others, and thereby invest all beings in bliss. So as I've mentioned in previous sessions, it's particularly potent to do this practice at this time of great travail in the world. We're all witnessing, I'm sure, with extraordinary alarm, the events in the Ukraine and the incredible human struggle that's taking place. And I was contemplating this through the course of the week and considering how, when a very similar process occurred, and in fact is still occurring in Syria, where over 3 million people are being similarly displaced, it's almost as though the world didn't notice or didn't care. So this is really very pertinent to our topic, because the foundation of our topic, generating bodhicitta, begins with not discriminating between the worth of friend, enemy, and stranger. So here we have a classic example of Syrians being basketed, if you like, into the stranger category. And even when they're in incredible suffering and pain, somehow that doesn't elicit a global response. And so we've got the president of Syria and Putin bombing away the villages, and unfortunately, a lot of the experience gained in that kind of warfare is now being used in the Ukraine. So it's not as if the two events aren't related. So I'm going to start the commentary now with just a reference that last week I wasn't playing pedantic word games when I playfully riffed on the interplay of self and other. So I thought to say a few words here, which will also supply a necessary introduction for verses to come. Lama Zopa, quote, "An example of how things usually exist is to consider how our labeling functions from the side of our perspective. By pointing to this person, I then label others as separate. I call you other in relation to I. Now, if this I, this is still Lama Zopa Rinpoche, if this I truly existed as it appears to the wrong concept grasping at inherent existent I, it would mean that it would exist completely from its own side. It would be independent. It would not depend on the mind. Likewise, if the other was truly existent, it would exist as other independently of mind. This is because it would exist completely from its own side. Now, this is Lama Zopa Rinpoche talking. Follow this carefully. If this was true, and from the perspective of others, you would also be independently and truly existent other. Then you would have to see yourself as other also. In the same way, if the I existed truly, independently, then others would have to have this perception of this I also as their own I. But this is not how it happens. You label yourself I, and in dependence on this label, others are labeled by you as other. Now you can see how the I and other exist by being merely imputed by mind depending on the base, body and mind. And the mind merely imputed the existence of I and other. This is all that the I and all that the other are. This is how the I and other exist and function. There is no I and no more than that existing. Now you can see that the I is empty and other is empty from its own side. But at the same time, it is a dependent arising, merely imputed by the mind on the base. So Lama Tsongkhapa elaborates how such entwined and distorted awareness of self and others causes all faults, as does Babongka Rinpoche, who illustratively quotes from the commentary on the Compendium of Valid Cognition, quote, "When there's a self, there's an awareness of other. Dividing between them brings grasping and anger. Closely connected with those two, all the faults come into being." So if we've got a copy of Lama Tsongkhapa's middle-length Lam Rim, we'll find this quote on page 117. Later, in the same text, while discussing the method of exchanging self and others, which is one of the two main lineages for generating bodhicitta, he writes, "A continuum and a collection," so such as a mental continuum or a time continuum, "a continuum and a collection are designated on many instants and a combination of many parts. They lack an autonomous entity. Since your own self and the self of others must be posited on a continuum or a collection, they are not established by way of their own entities, which would not merely be self and others posited in relation." So this is just a tantalizing prelude to our workshop, to our sessions together, but already is a topic of deepest significance, because we must consider how not just our lives, but our lives in relation to others is determined by this grasping at inherent existence. And it also determines how we might even envisage the scope and possibility of a spiritual path. To take just one quick example, in the second method of generating the precious mind of bodhicitta, we have 5 steps: the equality of self and others, the faults of self-cherishing, the benefits of cherishing others, exchanging self and others, which is our Tonlen practice, and giving and taking. So here we have building up to exchanging self and others and the actual practice of Tonlen itself. So if we delve more deeply into the first one, the equality of self and others, this can be explored in analytical meditation as follows. Firstly, from the side of others, there is no difference between ourselves and others. Oneself and others are completely the same in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. With this as a reason, think it is worthless to hate someone and be attached to someone else. The difference is that when you say I, you are speaking of just one single person, whereas others are limitless. Just as wrong to favour one beggar over 10 others, so it would be wrong to favour oneself over these countless others. From the side of self, we now consider the equality of self and others. Think that although we seem equal in a wish for happiness and freedom and freedom from suffering, they don't seem equal in the sense that some are actually harming and some are helping me. Therefore, isn't there a difference between them? But they are also equal from one's own point of view. From past lifetimes until now, sentient beings have been of benefit to us innumerable times. Moreover, they'll continue to help us over and over again in the future. But now think, although they have benefited us, just think of this life. They have also harmed us. So are they not equal after all? But the help they have given us is far overwhelmed by the harm. People have given us housing, provisions, education, and so forth. Without the mother's care, for example, we wouldn't even be sitting here today. So we might still entertain a doubt that about total strangers who have neither helped nor harmed us. Why should we generate equal respect towards these beings? But with this logic, we should be indifferent to the pain of an animal, completely indifferent, because that animal has neither harmed nor helped us. However, if we see a creature, such as a dog that's been wounded or run over by a car, we immediately generate powerful compassion. What of enemies who are enemies who have harmed us? From a Buddhist perspective, as we've been exploring this text, they are even kinder than all the others because they coax and encourage our spiritual development. When an enemy points at you, you have done this enemy becomes a true yardstick, a measurement of our inner development or failure thereof, and thereby helps in eliminating and expending obstacles, as well as in coaxing us to spiritually practice. Now, this is where the connection comes in with the initial topic. We can all consider the equality of self and others from an ultimate perspective. Like Buddha, the Buddha sees all beings and all their problems with total impartiality. It said that if one person was on one side of the Buddha attacking them, wounding them, and on another side anointing them with beautiful perfumes, the Buddha would have absolutely equal regard for the welfare of those two beings. So the Buddha, from an ultimate point of view, doesn't judge people according to whether they're conventionally good or bad, inverted commas. This is because all blame, if blame is to be given, is given to the delusions with which beings are afflicted, and these delusions can be removed. Moreover, there's no certainty with friends and enemies. If our enemies were enemies for all time, perhaps we'd be justified in discriminating them against them, but this isn't the case. Our enemy of our childhood can be our dearest friend today, and our dearest friend today can be our enemy or stranger tomorrow. Now, the final ultimate reason, and this is the crunch for our topic that's coming up in Wheel of Sharp Weapons, friend and enemies and strangers are not perceived by the ultimate mind of a Buddha, meaning that they do not exist inherently. Friend, enemy, and stranger are not friend, enemy, and stranger independently, in and of themselves, from where they appear to be. Lama Zopa Rinpoche gives a wonderful kind of exploration of this point. He says, here is one label, I am sitting. There is no reason at all except that the aggregate of the body, this form, is doing the action of sitting here right now. So when the body, this same body, stands up again, one's mind labels not sitting, but I am standing. There is no reason at all except that the form aggregate is standing up. Then, when one does the action of eating, because of this, one again labels. There is no reason at all to label and believe except that the body is doing the action of eating. So what is believed in is a mere imputation. If, this is the crunch, we're using logic here. Logic is critical to approaching emptiness. If this I, sitting I, was really and truly existing independently, not merely labelled from its own side, then when we get up, the appearance of sitting, because it is independent, would still be the I sitting. You see here exactly the same point we're making about self and other. If I existed inherently, I would be I to you because I'm I. I would appear as I to you. I'd be your I. Nonsensical. But from an analytical perspective, we can see here how if things existed from their own side, we quickly run into a very serious network of problems. So this is Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So if tomorrow I went to Sydney or some other place a long way from home, the I that is appearing now to oneself is not merely labelled as something real from its own side, would still be appearing sitting here, listening to me giving this talk and so on. Even in reality, by the time tomorrow comes, when the aggregates arrive in Sydney, there is no I sitting here on this cushion or in this room. So if I existed inherently here on this seat, and then I went to Sydney, or the form aggregate went to Sydney, I would still be here on this seat because I exist on this seat independently of any other phenomena, including being merely labelled by thought. So the correct conclusion, says Lama Zopa Rinpoche, is that the I is wherever the aggregates are. The I is not here tomorrow because the aggregates are also not. Therefore, the appearance of this I as something real and independent cannot be true. If it was true, the I would not be able to function in this way, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing up. The I is sitting when the aggregate of form is sitting and standing when the aggregate of form is standing. It is nothing other than what is merely imputed by the mind depending on the aggregates. So I've just sort of added a note here. Likewise, friend, enemy, I and other, outside and inside, liberation and captivity, happiness and sadness, etc. So I'm quoting now from Aryadeva's 400 stanzas, verse 348. Anything that has dependent arising is not independent. All things are not independent. Therefore, there is no self, meaning none of these things have a self-identity or a self-nature able to set us up, self up independently of other phenomena. So Geshe Sonam gives a gloss of this verse, Geshe Sonam Rinchen. Any relative thing which is found to arise and exist dependently and exist dependently is not found to exist independently. These two are mutually exclusive contradictories. Things are either independent or they're dependent. They can't be both. It's nonsensical. So we have to make a decision. All these phenomena lack an independent mode of existence, and thus there is no self of persons or phenomena. The person and persons and the aggregates do not exist inherently because they arise dependently. So these are crucial concerns for our text. And I'm just quoting here, I'm jumping ahead just to anticipate verse 115. Quote, so this is the Berzin translation. It is precisely the same when we come to experience pleasure and pain. Effects never come from the first causal actions, nor do they arise from the last several acts. Both pleasure and pain come from interdependent collections of forces and causes combined. So please, in this world of appearances alone, only, let's always be sure that what we do is of virtue and shun all those acts that would cause us great pain. So, just to sort of unpack that a little bit, if pleasure and pain, for example, existed from their own side, not dependent on causes and conditions, they would be utterly immobile, eternally isolated, just as Lama Zopa Rinpoche described would be the I or the other of existing from their own side, as they appear to innate self-grasping ignorance to be. In other words, pleasure and pain would be always already immaculately self-established and thus totally unrelated to any other thing. Thus, they would neither rely on causes and nor could they arise as results. They would be utterly immune to change or influence. How then, and this is the critical question we have to ask ourselves, how then could pain ever transform into joy, or joy into pain for that matter? How could our experience of them ever come to be? Could we even talk of experience, let alone experience? For example, if our knee was to be powerfully struck with a hammer, why would we feel any pain if we had innate joy? And if our knee was self-existent, then it could not be destroyed by even the most powerful hammer blow, because it would have no relation, interdependent relation with any other thing, such as, in this example, an environment which suddenly erupts a powerful weapon called a hammer, which strikes and shatters it. This is an event. It's based on a contact with other events. If the knee existed inherently, it would have no relation to any other thing. So a hammer could never come into contact with it, because if we have a knee that has no hammer contact inherently, it can't be the same knee that has hammer contact, can it? So it's not possible to have a new event arising, a new experience arising for a knee or in the knee and so forth. In other words, we would totally deny the very possibility of a causal interdependent chain because would have to preclude any interdependent relation. Likewise, if self-established, there would be no liberation, no path, no Buddha, no Four Noble Truths, no flux of experience, no experiencer, no subject and object, no here or there, no young and old. Indeed, the entire immeasurable multitude of conventional things would be impossible to establish, let alone cognize. Even a cognizer, such as a visual consciousness, is empty of existing from its own side. If my eye consciousness, for example, existed in and of itself, already established, fully covering the spot where it appears to be functioning or be, it could not function because it would be utterly divorced of the requirement, any requirement, that in dependence on contacting with something else, such as this form object, which we're going to label a cup. By contacting this object, we can say that we've cognized something, i.e. a cup. So as Arya Davis says in verse 400 of 400 stanzas, or in 400 stanzas, I haven't got the actual verse numbered here. If a thing did not depend on anything else at all, it would be self-established, but such a thing exists nowhere. And in Arya Davis' commentary, those things that exist only because of the presence of conceptualization and have no existence when there is no conception are without doubt like a snake conceived on a coiled rope, definitely not established in their own right. So this famous analogy of the snake posited independence on the rope, conceived as being present on the rope, will be taken as a point of departure at the beginning of next week. It's a very, very profound and fascinating example. So I'm going to now, just for reasons of auspiciousness, quote a very, very beautiful verse, which is frequently quoted by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it's found in many of the Lamrim texts. And I'm quoting this also from Illuminating the Intent, Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti's commentary on Nagarjuna's Standards of the Middle Way. The flowers with their open petals that delight so many minds, the supreme gold mansions, resplendent and attractive. None of these has a creator. They're posited through the power of conception. Through conceptualization, the world is imputed. So that's a sort of a quick encapsulation of just one aspect of the topic. But I wanted to open it up now because it's called a profound topic because it's so deep. And I just want to encourage us here not to balk or run away from the complexity or the profundity of the topic, but allow ourselves to be lured in step by step, because it just takes a tiny aspect of this topic to grab your mind and to start working on it, to begin to see the possibility of a radically different perspective on reality, which has vast beneficial implications for us. So be kind to ourselves and allow ourselves that opportunity. So I'm now going to go to verse 81 and continue our commentary from where we left off. I'm looking at both the Venerable Joan and the Berzin translations, but I'll start with the Berzin. So it's 82 in the Berzin translation. Just remember the Berzin translation is one verse ahead because one of the ways in the earlier stanza was broken up. 82, yeah. We always are jealous of those of great status. We feel holy gurus are threats to avoid. Overwhelmed by attachment and ruled by our passions, we spend all our time lusting after young loves. Trample him, dance on the head of this treacherous concept of selfish concern. Tear out the heart of this self-centered butcher who slaughters our chance for final release. And the Venerable Jones translation. Our high-handedness is great, and we consider the holy to be enemies. Due to our attachment being great, we eagerly grasp at the young, rant and rave on the head, and so forth. So again, we have a chronicle in this stanza of obnoxious or destructive behaviours, as well as the essential path to remedy them. So in the Berzin translation, we have reference to those of great status. And these beings are considered to be of great status because they have freed themselves from the control or rule of the self-grasping view. And it's for this reason that we can call them Dampa, Kipo person Dampa, noble. They're noble people, noble beings. Or if we consider the term more generally, as does Vasubandhu in Treasury of Knowledge, it can refer to one who always engages in virtuous actions. High-handedness. High-handedness refers to a jealous, arrogant resentment of those whom we view or recognize as our superiors, i.e. the holy ones, a reference to our precious gurus. High-handedness also refers to how we sometimes feel very bad and restless when we observe the success, progress, or good qualities of ordinary people like ourselves, we mentally suffer because we can't bear their success or good qualities. Such a problem is caused by our jealousy. This is a question we're asking. Do we have jealousy, in other words? Jealousy can drive us mad. We've had a recent story in the Australian press of a woman who's under trial for multiply stabbing and killing her ex-boyfriend while in bed with his new girlfriend. She hid in the room, and when they were asleep, she leapt out and repeatedly stabbed him in the chest. I say repeatedly, it wasn't just one blow to kill him. It was an act of incredible violence. So this is what jealousy can lead one to do. Or driven by overwhelming attachment and passionate emotions, we can lust after young people. And I actually had in my notes young flesh in inverted commas, because this is what we're really talking about here. It's apt under these circumstances to be so crude and blunt. And this is a plight that affects many. And I just thought to add here, in patriarchal cultures, men are applauded for such voracious hunting behaviour, as is held as a testimony to their virility. Just throw that in for good measure. And these are issues that the Australian federal government's dealing with at the moment, because there's been a number of quite scandalous cases of sexual exploitation happening within the very corridors of power. So it's not just a situation that's out there in the community, it goes right to the top. So psychologists even talk about sex addiction in such cases, and approaches to healing it are shared with approaches to treating chemical addictions. I suspect that over half of Hollywood films and half of Netflix, or maybe 2/3 of Netflix, would be bereft of their plots if we subtracted such behaviours from their storylines. The general point is that we can observe how having strong attachment and desire leads to a loss of control, moral control. We cease to be masters of ourselves and instead serve as slaves to voracious desires themselves. We also cast our judgment out the window. Often this leaves a trail of regrets. How many fathers, for example, have forfeited relationships with their children and their adult children because they have chosen to ditch their wives or partners for a younger woman, often the office secretary. It's often as corny as that, unfortunately, nonetheless. The other example given in the stanza is avoiding our gurus. If we find ourselves avoiding our gurus or avoiding their advice, perhaps, it's because we have something to hide, something to be ashamed of, or it might be a clear indication that we are being driven by jealousy and other mental afflictions. Or it may simply be a sign that we have so masterfully concocted an account of things to serve our own self-aggrandizement that it would somehow be humiliating to accept the help of our teacher. What a thought. Because we can't be a master if our teacher's a master. There's a certain humility involved in that relationship and we're incapable of it. So this is because we're blocked from having a true reciprocality with our teacher, a true open dialogue, because of self-cherishing. In other words, we don't even want our guru to interfere with our self-cherishing agenda. Stay out of this. You're not welcome here. I'm far too precious to run this risk by coming into contact. So perhaps looking at things in this way, our guru's advice is only understandable if we have the capacity to entertain a very long view of what they are recommending. we're not just thinking in terms of one lifetime or this lifetime. So our guru is capable of giving us advice for our future, vast future. And this might seem very awkward or contradictory in terms of our immediate fixations within this life. So we must remember to have this extensive view in order to comprehend our teacher's instructions. Pema Chodron gives a wonderful illustration of this. I've sort of slightly swung it around, but you'll see the relevance. She writes, a traditional analogy for the pain caused by the Lord of Form, the agate, the form agate here, is of a mouse being caught in a trap because it can't resist eating the cheese. The Dalai Lama offers an interesting twist to this analogy. This is Pema Chodron's words. He says that when he was a boy in Tibet, he wished to catch the mice, not because he wished to kill them, because he wanted to outsmart them. He said that the mice in Tibet must be more clever than ordinary mice because he never succeeded in catching one. Instead, they became his models of enlightened conduct. He felt that, unlike most of us, they had figured out that the best thing they could do for themselves, this is the crunch, was to refrain from the short-term pleasure of the cheese in order to have the long-term pleasure of living. He encouraged us to follow their example. Isn't this wonderful? So the selfish mind, the self-cherishing mind, is like a mouse that gets caught in a trap because it can't resist eating the cheese dangled before its nose. It cannot admit the possibility of a longer or a wider view. Rather, it must declare any longer view as an interference to be dismissed or ignored because it's going to stop it from immediately partaking of the pleasure of the cheese. So you can see here how that this is really a very apt analogy for how desirous attachment works in our lives. Consequently, we can also see the same thing happening in relation to parents advising a child. When a child, this is using this analogy to understand not wanting to hear your guru's advice, when a child hears its parent advice and they don't like it, it throws a tantrum and will even smash the toy that it's just been given. So when we behave like this, we cut off our nose to spite our face. We squander, perhaps, what is the only real chance we have to escape misery. So once again, the enemy upon whose head we must dance is the self-cherishing attitude. So move now to verse 83. It's the 82 in the Venerable Jones. We do not think of friendships as long-term commitments. I think this is the Burson translation I'm using for this one. We do not think of friendships as long-term commitments. We treat old companions with thoughtless neglect. And when we are making new friends with a stranger, we try to impress him with grandiose ways. Trample him, trample him. So this verse is very, very important and very interesting because it's looking at the manner in which we turn our backs on others, even our friends, our dear friends. So in the past, as we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we may have known someone whom we considered an intimate friend, someone who was very close to our heart, someone whom we longed for. But when that same person faced hard times, perhaps falling from a higher position to a lower, or experiencing some kind of mental or physical problem, we did not think of helping them and supporting them. So this is the opposite of what's required. When our friends or others close to us face difficulties, we should always be there to support them. Rather than trying to distance ourselves, we should always be there. We should try to be even closer, because at such times, they really need our help and support. If we do not support a friend at such a time, it is obvious that we're not a true friend and lack a good human nature. Meanwhile, when we meet a stranger, we go out of our way to impress them with our wonderful personality. This is following the line in the verse, we try to impress him with grandiose ways. We flirt, in other words. We flirt so that I will be exceptionally noticed, desired, and admired. So you can throw enormous energy to doing this with a total stranger where we've been totally incapable of responding to the call for help of a dear friend. This kind of incredibly wobbly, distorted modus operandi is the very nature of the operations of self-cherishing. So what we must recognize, says Geshe Doga in his commentary, a friendship does not just serve the interests of one person, i.e. myself, it must satisfy the interests of the other. Our concern for the experience of the other is the reason for our friendship, not our concern for our experience of ourselves, because this is self-cherishing and it's going to filter and twist and judge everything correspondingly. So our speech and our bodily actions should follow our mind in being genuinely considerate and friendly. These three must act in cohesive consort. And we mustn't be too hasty in abandoning old friends. If we find we have readily distanced ourselves from an old friend, whom in the past we cherished as a closest friend, then when that friend gets into trouble, we'll feel no compunction to come to their aid. So the conclusion, we must overcome the self-cherishing attitude so that we're in the unique position of being able to see everyone as our dearest friend. This feeling of affection will extend even to a close past partner or friend who has left you for someone else. This is a key litmus test for whether desirous attachment or genuine love is involved. And it's a very interesting one for relationships when they break up, because they often go through, as we know, periods of bitter acrimony and grudges and resentments that can poison experience going forward in a very, very disturbing manner. You can have implications for many, many other people. So if we genuinely respect this person who's left us for someone else, challenging stuff, we'll be delighted, says Geshe Doga in one of his commentaries, if they find someone who makes them happier than we did. Isn't that interesting? Rather than feeling sorry for ourselves or resentful that they actually swapped over, we think, wow, you're so lucky you found someone else better than me. I'm really, really happy for you. And I'll bring soup next Wednesday. So there you go. So we'll jump now to verse 83. And in the Venerable Jones version, due to lacking clairvoyance, we eagerly lie and deprecate. Due to lacking compassion, we snatch away the heart of those who have confidence in us. Rant and rave. And Alex Berzin, we lack clairvoyance, yet lie feigning powers. And when that proved wrong, we must bear all complaints. We have little compassion for those who are near us. Whenever they blunder, we are quick to lash out. trample him, trample him. So this verse is dealing with the possibility of spiritual fraud. And there is, from a Buddhist perspective, genuine clairvoyance. There can be. I'll just give an example here. In 1983, Geshe Dawa, who at that time was the Geshe of Tara Institute, one night out of the blue warned Owen Cole, who was the spiritual program director at that time, not to make a phone call that evening. That was the advice. Anyway, later on that evening, Owen suddenly felt he needed to make an urgent phone call. So he went into the office to make the call and discovered that the line was dead. So thinking that he still wanted to make the phone call, he decided to step outside Tara Institute into the street where there was a Telstra phone booth. And while he was dialing the number and putting his coins in the slot, a stranger appeared out of nowhere and struck him in the head with their fist. And when Owen told me this story, he said, "I wish I'd listened to Geshe Dawa." He'd been told not to make a phone call. He went ahead and did it. So there are clairvoyant powers. However, around this time, I was rather curiously doing tarot readings professionally. And when I became Buddhist, I was a tarot reader before I was Buddhist. When I became Buddhist and started studying morality, I became concerned about my practice of telling the future with the tarot. And was it a legitimate activity? And I asked Geshe Dawa, and he said, it is okay to do, providing you don't tell lies. Isn't that interesting? And to be honest, I couldn't tell whether I was telling a lie or not when I was reading the cards. I was doing my best to be true, but I could not tell that I wasn't telling a lie. And so on that basis, I stopped doing those readings. So it's just an interesting example. So we all know there are telephone clairvoyants where you can ring up and pay $100 and get a 20-minute reading. And I actually had a chat with a telephone clairvoyant, not online, but I met them in sort of my daily travels. And I asked him about it, and he said his job was entirely made up. He was doing it for a living. So there are a lot of fake clairvoyants out there. So we have to be very, very careful that we don't join their ranks by feigning powers ourselves. And of course, these are spiritual hazards that become more possible if we begin to attract students or disciples or business clients in the case of a commercial tarot reader or whatever. So that's one point. Yeah, so the instruction is not to tell lies, not to deceive others, but to show them compassion with a good and honest nature on our part. And the verse is also asking us not to be quick to lash out when others blunder. This again picks a key aspect of self-cherishing. We're so quick to stick the poker in someone, aren't we, when we feel that they've done the wrong thing? But are we willing to do the same thing when we might perform an unskillful action? So we need to have a genuine humility here. So I'm going to move now to verse 84 and the Venerable Jones translation only this time. Due to our hearing being paltry, we conjecture widely about everything. Due to the extent of our scriptural knowledge being negligible, we develop wrong views regarding all, rant and rave on the head of the conception, and so forth. So Geshe Doga's advice on this regarding this stanza, if we do not approach our meditation practice in the right way, then no matter how much time we spend on the practice, we will never gain any certainty about the truth. So this verse is saying, therefore, that before we do meditation practice, we have to familiarize ourselves with what to meditate on, how to meditate, and so forth. It emphasizes the importance of studying or listening, then contemplating on what we intend to meditate upon. And we must do this study and contemplation prior to meditating. So this relates back to an earlier point made in verse 56 or 57 in the Burson translation, regarding the need to properly prepare if we're to make any real progress on the path. Wishful thinking is not enough, nor vaunting, overleaping ambition, even if well-intended. So that verse read, we have high expectations of speedy attainment, yet we do not wish to work at the practice involved. We make many fine projects we plan to accomplish, yet none of them are done ever in the end. So the issue here is really how we might overcome psychological uncertainty. If we don't listen, contemplate, and meditate, then the knowledge we espouse will be a half-baked assemblage garnered from here or there or everywhere on a whim. In other words, we're capable of creating gobbledygook, some kind of weird confection that we've improvised and which can bear no real investigation or coherent analysis. So this might be another reason why we don't want our guru to interfere, by the way, because they might point out that our ideas are wacky and completely unsupportable. So Geshe Doga says, when we become certain about what we've read or heard based on our own reasoning knowledge, so it's referring to analytical analysis there, investigation, then the knowledge we have gained from listening or hearing develops into a firmer conviction that only comes from contemplating it. Consequently, if we engage in meditation practice, we can further deepen that conviction with new insights. Through meditation practice, our knowledge and firm conviction finally develop into an experiential inner realization. So we have to work progressively and skillfully to achieve internal spiritual realization. So I thought to tell a story here of Geshe Nawandagi, who's Geshe Doga's teacher and one of my teachers as well. And this is an apocryphal story. I wasn't there when it happened, but someone told me that Geshe Nawandagi, by the way, was capable of being very direct and very ferociously so. Scary, he was scary. He had these blazing eyes. And if he looked at you, he looked straight through you like a laser beam. So anyway, on this particular occasion, he was teaching on the Lam Rim, and he was on the topic of death and impermanence. And he asked the students at large whether they had realized the meaning of impermanence. And one brave young student put up their hand. Foolish move, as it turns out. And so maybe not so in the end. And Geshe Nawandagi said, if you have actually realized death and impermanence, if I was to bring a bucket of water into this gompa and ask you to stick your head into it, you'll do so without a moment's hesitation. So, in other words, there's a big, big difference between thinking we've understood death and impermanence and actually having realized death and impermanence. Because if we've realized death and impermanence, there'll be no surprise to hear in the next moment that we're going to die. There'll be no shock whatsoever. That's the difference. This is a crucial difference. And it's the same with love and compassion. If we think we've generated love and compassion, our enemy comes along, we find ourselves generating all sorts of hostility. But if we have generated real love and compassion, then, as I've mentioned in other talks, we'll experience delight as that person approaches. That's because we've had the realization that they are an appropriate, affectionate object of our love. We've done all that work on our cushions. So I was going to talk about yogic direct perceive and so forth, but here, because it said that if you want to really recognize impermanence, subtle impermanence, we need to develop a very high level of realization called a yogic direct perceiver. And that kind of yogic direct perceiver arises in dependence on very systematic developments of powerful levels of concentration in meditation that's able to remain without distraction on a subtle phenomena. At the moment, trying to hold an object for even 1 minute is perhaps impossible. So how are we going to see the momentary changes in an object if we can't even grasp the overall object in a stable manner? So this is another reason why we have to step backwards all the time and build up from the ground. In other words, we can't pluck realizations like an apple from a tree. And so I've referred to this as magical, spiritual magical thinking. We can, if self-cherishing, hold ourselves and our mental powers in such high regard that we assume the world will obligingly conform to our needs or commands, as it were. We merely need to think about some spiritual accomplishment for the circumstances enabling it to miraculously appear. This is how magical thinking works. But such magical thinking constitutes a powerful distraction by which we're waylaid. It casts a veil over our capacity to see anything accurately. So psychologists in the West refer to magical thinking as a generalized anxiety disorder because it can permeate everything we do or don't do. So in other words, step back from magical thinking and work on the foundations and work from there. Then magic can happen, by the way. We're not anti-magic here in that sense. Will verse 85, Venerable Joan translation. Thanks, John. Due to cultivating attachment and hatred, we criticize everything on the other side. Due to cultivating jealousy, we exaggerate about others and deprecate them, rant and rave on the head, so forth. So we have to ask ourselves in meditation, when did I actively not just generate, but cultivate attachment? Cultivate here means like growing beans in the garden. We tend in successive stages of care so that the thing can develop. So when did we cultivate attachment with the same degree of care as it increased in intensity, stage by stage? Likewise, when did I actively not just generate, but cultivate hatred? And again, we polish hatred, we enhance hatred stage by stage. So we have to be honest here. There's a lot at stake, not just for ourselves, but obviously for the other person. So I'm going to move very quickly here, but this has a direct resonance with the description of how we generate afflictions based on superimposing a false degree of existence onto the I, the mere I. So desirous attachment can be defined. Firstly, it can be applied to both external and internal phenomena. And desire itself is a mental factor which can be seen to develop in stages. First, we behold or remember an object and feel it to be attractive. We then focus awareness on its good qualities, this attractive portion of qualities, if you like, and proceed to exaggerate them. And this process of enhancing and exaggerating the portion of good, attractive good qualities is referred to as inappropriate attention. It's inappropriate because we're building on a whole aspect of hyper attractiveness that exceeds that initial moment of attractiveness that appeared, that triggered the first moment of our interest in the object. We don't notice we're doing this. That's what we do. But I think myself, I know if I'm trying to buy something on eBay, for example, you have eBay in America, I think, don't you? It's like an online shop, but it's a bidding system. And if suddenly other people appear to bid, you find yourself becoming more concerned that you're going to miss out on the object. And the object becomes, I can assure you this is true, more and more attractive. The more other people indicate that they want it and they're going to take it away from you. So it gets to the point where you can actually suffer grievously if you miss out on the auction. This is a classic example of how desire is operating all the time. So eventually, having inflated our idea of the object, we hold the object to be so desirable in and of itself, from its own side, that we actually develop an intense desire to possess it. And that desire reaches a level that's like being glued. That's why I'm doing this body gesture, being glued to the object. To take it away is to prize the object like a physical peeling away of our flesh. It's that extreme painful. So when all these stages are completed, we have generated the mind of desirous attachment. So we must begin to investigate this in meditation. Similarly with anger, anger is a mental factor that develops in stages. It observes with inappropriate attention an animate or an inanimate object and feels it to be unattractive. Isn't that interesting? Anger is a sort of recoil side of desire from this perspective. It exaggerates its bad qualities, its unattractive qualities, until it considers it undesirable to the degree of repellence. And in dependence on seeing the object as repellent, don't come near me, don't touch me, stay away, this kind of pushing awayness, if you like, grows into antagonism, and that triggers a wish to harm. So when all the stages are complete, we've generated anger. So I'm not going to elaborate here more than just mention, if things were intrinsically objects of desire, ... If my object of desire was intrinsically desirable, you would love my taste in music, without a doubt, because it's absolutely desirable. But it's my idea of torture to be locked in a room listening to a singer whose music I don't enjoy. And as we know, they some of the army torture uses heavy metal, don't they, to torture their prisoners, send them out of their minds. So if music was intrinsic, Guns N' Roses was intrinsically attractive, then the more and the louder they played it to the prisoners, the more delighted they would be. It wouldn't be torture at all. If objects were intrinsically objects of hatred, they would appear as hateable from any direction. So I just wanted to mention here, this is a really tricky one. I just throw it in to sort of, it's a good sort of topic for debate or discussion. Hitler loved his dogs. He loved dogs, and especially his German shepherd, Blondie. Blondie thought that Hitler was pretty special. If Hitler was in, this is really an interesting example, if Hitler was intrinsically bad, or worthy of hatred, then how could Blondie have seen him as attractive? These are really, really emotionally challenging examples. So I'm not saying we can't have moral judgment and moral responsibility, but rather that moral judgment and responsibility can only happen and work because it exists in interdependent relations. So to cut to the conclusion for this verse, we need to abstain from certain destructive or restrictive behaviours such as killing out of ignorance, hatred or desire. We need to uproot the habit formations that allow them to run unrestricted in our lives. And moreover, we need to go further and remove the karmic imprints arising from desire, past actions of desire and hatred, that will otherwise definitely result in suffering states in the future. So from a Buddhist perspective, we have to also purify, put effort into purifying the traces, the imprints of those negative actions in the past. So due to cultivating jealousy, we deprecate others and exaggerate our own qualities. So I think I've talked about that already. But interestingly, Geshe Rabten, in his definition of envy, he's using envy here rather than jealousy, he says envy is known as a proximate or a secondary affliction, and it's classified under the afflictions derived from anger. Isn't that interesting? Jealousy is a subspecies of anger. It is defined as a distinct mental factor that out of attachment to respect and gain, so it also involves attachment, is unable to bear the good things others have, and it thus brings about deep inner turmoil. And it's that moment that we can then act to injure the object. So it becomes a form of hatred. It's also necessary to consider fear, because fear is often in play with jealousy. It sees, for example, that someone may be about to gain a position that one has wanted very much for oneself. Desirous of the position, I am afraid that I haven't got it. And I therefore start to dislike or even hate the person who has received the promotion. And I see that person as the cause of my problem. See how it works. So there's a great emphasis here on appears to be the cause of the problem, because the reality is that that person who received the promotion might not even know that I exist, let alone that they took the job away from me who was expecting to get it. So how can they be responsible? So there are two kinds of envy, one that arises in regard to material possessions and one that comes through things such as talk about profit and loss. So I need not go further there. But we can even be jealous of those who appear to have more Dharma knowledge or make more rapid spiritual progress than do we. And Chogyam Trungpa famously called this spiritual materialism. So I'm sure we've come into contact with that at some point. So we often notice this in Dharma centers where a certain spiritual athleticism takes place, where people attempt to dart for the finishing line in front of everyone else. And you can develop scorn for those who are somehow less able to keep up, or you can be scorned by others because you're too far out in front and so forth. So this is really an example of worldly dharmas infecting the spiritual scene. And that's why Chogyam Trungpa calls it spiritual materialism. It's a form of materialism, really, fundamentalism. So will verse 86, the Venerable Joan, we do not study yet despise the vast teachings. We do not rely on a Lama yet denigrate the scriptures, rant and rave. So the meaning is evident. It is arrogance that prevents us from studying Dharma, while also despising or putting down the vast teachings. Likewise, our afflictions, such as ignorance and pride, block us from relying on a Lama. Yet still we go further than this and denigrate the scriptures. The scriptures, the intent of which we have not clearly even begun to understand. So our arrogance in this case is double. So Geshe Doga says, the reason for being critical and holding such narrow views on learning Dharma is due to having only gained a little knowledge and not being able to take any more knowledge than one already has. One believes that whatever knowledge one has gained is sufficient, and therefore there is no need to depend on or seek a spiritual master or to receive such teachings from others. So I can leave that there, I think. So verse 87, we do not explain the Venerable Joan translation. We do not explain the scriptural baskets, yet compile self-fabricated lies. We are not adept in pure appearances, yet talk a lot of gibberish, rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin to the hearts of the enemy, the self, and the executioner. Maraya. So people in my position that are presenting the Dharma or attempting to present the Dharma have to be particularly mindful at this point. Do I explain the three scriptural baskets, Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma, or do I just make stuff up, trade in self-fabricated lies? So this is a really, really important question to ask ourselves. So Geshe Doga observes, these days there are many followers of spiritual traditions who are really not true practitioners of the tradition they claim to follow. Rather, they only pretend to follow that tradition in order to promote their own cause. They tell other people outright lies, saying they have supernatural qualities such as ability to perform miracles or the ability to directly perceive higher beings or channel messages from them. If they lie about having visions in their dreams or in their practice, or they lie about having visions in their dreams or in their practice. So what they're actually doing, says Geshe Doga, is contradicting the spiritual tradition and the founder of the tradition they claim to follow. So corruption can creep in, even into the places of spiritual or practice. So this verse also refers to pure vision. And we might just look at pure vision generally as the capacity to view reality without mental pollution or distortion. But it can also refer to claims to have exceptionally high tantric realizations, or even to be ourselves an actual manifestation of the deity by deity, such as Maitreya Buddha, for example. As such, we feel we can claim to have transcended mundane appearances and more dangerously, conventional morality. So these aren't sort of theoretical points. I think most of us will know the famous Jonestown mass suicide in Guyana in 1978, in which 909 people died. Those who attempted to flee drinking the poisoned Kool-Aid were shot down with guns and crossbows, while the Reverend Jim Jones broadcast the need to drink over loudspeakers blaring over the camp. There was also the Tokyo Sarin subway attack in 1995 by the Armageddon apocalyptic cult Om Shinrikyo, which directly drew on early Indian Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, as well as taking Hindu and Christian elements. So you can see here that without pure motivation, we're only ever a few steps away from either falling into a cult or setting up ourselves to lead one. That's food for thought. I'm fascinated by cult psychology, and I've read many, many books on the topic, and it's always the case that the cult leader develops their cultic behavior in progressive stages. They often start out really, really earnestly and well, But as they become more powerful, things go off the rails and they become self-deceiving, hallucinatory, if you like. They cannot actually take responsibility for their actions anymore in a way, because they become completely distorted about their own powers and so forth. I'm just going to continue a few more moments here because the time's very precious. Will verse 88, without condemning actions that are not Dharma, we set forth various repudiations to all the excellent explanations, rant and rave. That's the Venerable Joan, yes. So this verse likewise points out the grave dangers of not calling out actions that are not Dharma, such as killing, while also promulgating various repudiations to all the excellent explanations. In other words, talking about those who corrupt the teachings while exploiting the framework, the social framework or community they provide. But more particularly, it's stressing the situation where we are the agents ourselves of fostering such trouble and thus dangerously impacting others via the promulgation of various wrong views. So wrong views are indicated in the Lam Rim presentation as mainly comprising, from a Buddhist perspective, the view that the four truths, the three jewels, cause and effect, etc., do not exist. So it's in this way, by making these kinds of denials, that we set forth various repudiations to the excellent explanations, as the second line of this verse indicates. This means that we do not despise immoral actions, but instead we dispute and attempt to pick flaws in the system of Dharma that does identify wrong actions and teaches ways to avoid them. So we thus cause trouble for ourselves and others. So Aryadeva says, just like the sense faculties in the body, benighted ignorance resides in them all. So Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand indicates that benighted ignorance pervades and acts as a cause for the other delusions. If we're acting this way, it's because we're deluded through being ignorant. However, benighted ignorance, he says, is difficult to identify. And I was reflecting on this during the course of the week. Why did Pabonka Rinpoche say that? And I came to the conclusion that benighted ignorance is difficult to identify because we're married with it at the hip. If we're really willfully ignorant in the way that this verse is describing, we identify with ignorance and as us. So we can't actually portion its measure of existence apart in order to see what it is. We're infected, in other words. So as ordinary beings, we view things using wrong values. We do not know how to discriminate between what is beneficial and what is harmful. As such, how can we hope to steer towards anything positive? I might just do one more verse if you don't mind, because after this verse, the text radically changes its focus. And so the kind of commentary that I'll need to give significantly shifts. So verse 89, without being ashamed with regard to sources of shame, we wrongly consider that which is not shameful, the Dharma, to be shameful, rant and rave. And Berzin says, we are never embarrassed when acting disgracefully, only respectable deeds cause us shame. Trample him, trample him. So this verse again, like the last, measures the failure of our moral compass. Our ethical corruption is so great that we fail to be embarrassed or ashamed when performing negative deeds. And we can even take pride in doing actions that are negative, immoral, unwholesome, unskillful, or degrading. Anyone performing such actions has good reason to feel bad or ashamed of him or herself. But if our self-cherishing is significantly strong enough, we will put that shame and embarrassment aside. So I'll just quickly mention here that the Tibetan word for shame is no sayo, which literally means having a sense of shame or refraining from doing negative actions due to personal beliefs. So an example of shame would be, I'm about to hurt someone, and then I stop to think, this is not right. I'm not going to hurt my mother. I'm her child. That's an example of shame. So shame in this context is seen as positive. And the Tibetan word for embarrassment is telyo, which means that we to stop doing negative action out of concerns for others. And so embarrassment has a concern that others don't view us negatively, whereas the other one is we don't view ourselves. So one's internally focused, one's externally focused. They both amount to the same thing. So this is different, I would like to propose here, from the notions of shame and embarrassment that we might talk about in ordinary social settings. We're talking about two key mental attributes here that are going to protect our practice of virtue. So that leads us up to verse 90, which is the verse just before the change of tone. So I think I can leave it here, and I think we've got a question here. Nancy, you had your hand up. I can't hear, Nancy. I think you've got your microphone off.
I think it was Mary Jo that had the hand up.
Oh, sorry, Mary Jo.
Well,
Thank you.
it's not a very well-formed question,
Yeah.
but a little bit, just a little bit before this, you said something about ignorance, I
Mhm.
think, and I just didn't quite catch that.
I think it might have been my reference to benighted. Oh, the ignorance spreading through the senses. Was that the part that you mentioned?
I don't know.
It was a quote from Aryadeva. He was talking about benighted, and Pabong Rinpoche talking about benighted ignorance as saturating everything we do.
Benighted? What does that mean?
It's let me just get back to my notes here. Yes, I looked it up and I can't trying to remember now. It means afflicted.
Afflicted.
Yes.
Afflicted.
Like problematic, disastrous, damaging. It's benighted. So it's not a royal term as such, but becoming a knight. It's referring to this kind of negative aspect to ignorance, afflictive aspect. So
Which is all pervasive. It's everywhere then.
it's not ultimately everywhere, but until we remedy it, it saturates our operations, even at the level of the senses, if you like. So it's permeating, in other words.
The level of the senses.
And so it's become so embedded and so familiarized. And it's true, it does affect the senses, because if we're looking at attachment, we don't just look at the object of attachment with an ordinary look, do we? We have a particular way of looking at an object of attachment, and it's got to do with zeroing in and refusing to let it go. We hold it, for example, don't we? And if we say, oh, get out of here, I can't bear the sight of you, when we're angry, we literally can't bear the sight of them. So we're talking about the senses here being affected by the delusions, they're being pervaded. So the reference was, oh, it's not there, is it? It's in the other, it must have been in the, yeah. So benighted ignorance pervades and acts as a cause for all the other delusions. However, benighted ignorance is difficult to identify. So it's difficult to identify, as I mentioned, because it's saturated through everything, and we can't catch it out because it's everywhere. So this is referring to the grasping at inherent existence, the self-grasping, which is the foundation for self-cherishing.
Yes.
So we can't get rid of self-cherishing. This is one of the questions really will be one of the questions in our exam. We can't get rid of self-cherishing without first uprooting self-grasping, because we haven't upset the evolutionary mechanisms by which we generate these powerful afflictions, because they're all predicated on believing that the object is existing in the way that's appearing to innate self-grasping to be. So when you appear as my dearest friend, I grasp at you as my dearest friend existing from their own side. I superimpose an intrinsic findability onto the merely labeled dear friend. And it's because I'm then grasping at you as a real dear friend from your own side, independently of me projecting friend onto you, that I'm then able to load you with all of these exaggerated qualities and expectations, because they adhere to the target. So though self-grasping is like a magnet, and any quality that's superimposed will stick to it, if you like, it's actually not there. And so, but, it's a really interesting topic, because the object of self-grasping in reality, which is an inherently existent self of persons or self of things, doesn't exist at all. And so there's no real target on which to stick something at all if we investigate deeply. And that's why when we realize the emptiness of something, it no longer becomes able to act as the basis for the generation of an affliction. And so we begin to transform in a very, very profound manner. This is what liberation, it starts to mean something to be liberated, because we can no longer generate the afflictions where formerly we could. So, yeah.
And how does that ignorant and the senses, how does that come together? Are our senses, if I touch something, is that not truly what I'm touching?
No, it's not. We have to be careful here to distinguish. It's a great question, by the way. I want to just mention that questions are the way to go with this topic. Really, really important. So
if this is too much time, I'm sorry.
I'm thinking to myself, it's probably best left to next week, but I can at least touch on it. Okay. So how can I put this? In the text, there is no, how do we go? I can touch something because my hand exists interdependently, and the cup exists interdependently, and the contact of the two exists independently. And in reliance on that, I can have a perception of touching the cup. So all of these aspects can only function because none of them exist from their own side. If they did, I wouldn't be able to contact the cup or anything. There's no cup that could be contacted, as I mentioned before, because it would be absolutely in and of itself, independently of any other thing.
Okay.
So it'd be a universe of a cup with nothing else. And so ordinary touch, which is what you're talking about, I think, exists conventionally. Buddhism isn't arguing with that.
Okay.
But that conventional touch is the basis on which ignorance superimposes an intrinsic findability. So to take an example, there's nothing on the side of the cup which makes it worthy to be seen. There's the mere seeing of the cup in dependence on the contact of my eye consciousness with the form here, which is suitable to be labelled cup. So there's no argument with that conventionally, but I see a cup here in a way that exceeds what's actually there. So I think this is really interesting to think about. I live next to a railway line and I hear the trains come and go. And in one of the teachings, it's like in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is another form. Sound, smell, taste, and touch, tangible, do not exist inherently. This is there in the Heart Sutra. So when I hear the train go past, I label train going past, and then I think there's a real train going past there. But in actual fact, there is no real train going past there. There's merely a merely labeled train going past.
Yeah.
And so they're vastly different things.
Yes.
So if a sound existed inherently, or if touch existed inherently, it would be possible to experience touch without touching, because it would already be touch. You see what we're getting at? Whereas touch is a product of a system of things coming together, causes and effects, and so forth, contact in particular. And so if I'm completely deaf, I do not hear sound, do I? So this is a sign that sound appears in dependence on a certain physiological structure accompanied by a certain mind able to activate and operate through that sensory machinery, if you like, of the ear in order to produce an impulse which is then interpreted as sound. So even from a Western scientific point of view, sound is up for grabs. What it is there a sound out there already in and of itself?
Right.
Is the universe full of sounds that are yet to be heard?
Yes. Yes, is it a sound if we don't hear it? Yes.
Yeah, these are really, really fantastic and interesting questions.
Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed the talk very much.
Yeah, so we're going to get a little bit more, well, we're going to go a lot more deeply into it the next couple of sessions. So I just wanted to recommend at the end of the, I'm taking up John's question time, this book, How to See Yourself As You Really Are by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is an absolutely superb introduction, or not more than an introduction, a summarized encapsulation, would be better, of this incredibly profound topic. But because it's called How to See Yourself As You Really Are, it's dealing particularly with identifying the false mode of existence of the self of person, which is brought up in many of the stanzas to come. And at the end of the chapters has some little meditational exercises as well. So it sort of functions as a manual. And it's based on a series of talks that His Holiness has given. And it's been translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. So it's a very splendid translation. So that's relates to the meditation at the end of the questions today. So we'll do the dedication prayers, John, and then I'll jump out. So thank John for offering to lead the discussion today.
The dedication prayers.
Yes.
Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Lifelong prayer to His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serves as bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honouring the three jewels, Saviour of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And to Tenzin Osalhita, Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for all those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, into a family mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, Lama, please live long. And for our Geshe Sherab, beloved teacher, leading your students towards wisdom and compassion, explaining through exacting discernment the steps of the graduated path, you are the unequaled guide. Please live a long and stable life.
So thank you very much, and for your continuous interest throughout the sessions. We have 3 more to go. We had 2 officially, and then we added a 3rd one. And they're going to be very much needed because of the complexity. And I'm going to do my best, and I'll, for example, provide a little introduction to do with empty sound. I think it's a really interesting topic. So I'm very happy to respond to particular questions. And just to mention that this topic of emptiness, it said that once we doubt that one thing exists inherently, we doubt that all things exist inherently. And once we've realized that one thing doesn't exist inherently, we're able to see that all things don't exist inherently. And so it's really valuable to do as Mary's done, picking, an example of particular things and thinking, well, hey, let's look at this and see what the situation is. Then, oh no, I'm going to look at what is a mouse, etc., etc. So these are great ways of working. It makes it very dynamic and very real. So thank you very much. And again, to thank John in particular for stepping in for Stephen, who was unable to attend today because he's traveling, but he'll be back next week. Enjoy.
Thank you, Ross.
See you all.
Thank